I have been writing pretty much my whole life. I started making up stories in my head when I was about 3 or 4. I would narrate my life sitting under the piano. I would just sit down there and narrate what I was doing like I was writing a book. When I finally figured out how to type on a computer, I started writing, and it was just a passion. I was like, I had to get my stories out on paper. I write fantasy, typically medieval fantasy, ranging between like swords and sword fighting and archery. I have some creatures in my books who are advanced technologically though, just because, you know, we need a sci-fi twist. I write medieval fantasy just because it's a genre that I've felt like I've connected with God the most through. So I feel like I can read fantasy and write fantasy and see so many parallels to the God that I know. Currently I'm working on this, basically an epic saga of a fantasy world called Arctashia, which has been overtaken by darkness, and the 3 main characters, Evie, Keliad, and Laetera, have to try to take it back from the darkness. Evie lives with her abusive mother and paralyzed brother, and they try to struggle to live, and then she gets rescued by a random stranger who she ultimately becomes very close to. Her name is Kithrea, and Kithrea tells her about her real past. Keliad is an elf, and his sister Curiel decides to run off to Delandrius, which is like the pinnacle of the darkness. And there's a big disaster, and they ultimately fall into a different place in Arctashia. Laetera is a human-type creature called a Talcine, who are like humans, but they're very xenophobic and very, very controlling. One day she finds an outsider in the lower part of Talsior, and then of course disaster ensues. And ultimately Laetera, Evie, and Keliad meet and come together and try to save Arctashia from the darkness. I go outside a lot for inspiration because my story is I would almost describe it as airy type story. It's a very outdoorsy story. Everybody's outside most of the time. And so I love going out into nature. I live up in the mountains. There are a ton of pine trees and lakes and all kinds of fun stuff. And I just love to go outside and look at it and transform it into my world. Some weeks I'll write my book for hours upon hours. I've spent days writing my novel. Full days. I've just sat down and written all day. It was terrible at first. The world was kind of a spin-off on Middle-earth. It started out as a very disjointed plot. I went too fast with it. Things were confusing, things weren't clear, and it wasn't good. I sent it to one of my best friends, and she just completely tore the whole thing apart and told me every single hole in the plot that there was, and I was so happy that she did it. I think she must have been a little bit annoyed with all the plot holes, though. My biggest challenge is writer's block. I've found, especially in this story, that I will get to a certain point and just get stuck. And it's not so much a block as in I don't know where to go with it, but it's a block in that I'm bored. And I'm tired of this story, and I'm sick of writing these characters, and I just am done. So I have to just take a break. I'll step away from the story for up to a month and just let myself recuperate and try to find some more inspiration. Then I come back to it with a fresh outlook, and I'm so excited to write it again. I ultimately discovered a much deeper passion for my characters, and so my characters I think have a lot more depth now than they did, so they've grown a lot. I've found the plot. I've been able to make it weave a lot more now, so I'm very proud of my plot now. The main piece of advice I would give to other writers is don't take on too much. I ultimately took on too much, especially at the get-go. If I hadn't been as passionate about this story as I am, I never would have gotten this far. This book is the first time I've actually been super serious about getting it edited, getting it finished, getting it published, and keeping on going with the series. I'd like to create a big series. Like, I want it to be at least a trilogy, maybe a 6-book series, maybe more. It'll just depend on how long it takes to get the plot around to where it needs to go. But I definitely know it's not a 1-book series. In future books, I'd really like to see them bonding more. Evie, Laetera, and Keliad, when they meet, they're very disjointed, and they don't really want to be around each other because they're so opposite and similar in awkward places. And so it's tough for them at first. I'd also like to see more of the underlying darkness getting exposed and obliterated. What have I done to get me where I am now? I wrote a lot of really crummy stories about my stuffed frogs. I thought they were amazing at the time. I go back and read them now and I'm cringing at every sentence because the writing is so bad. Then in, I guess it was 7th grade, for school, we had the assignment to write a short story. It was about my dog, and she went and joined with this wolf pack, and the writing was terrible. But because I actually finished a story, it gave me the inspiration to go ahead and keep trying. And after I wrote that, I finally discovered my voice for writing, and it's way less awkward than it was then. And so now I'm here writing a book that's actually kind of good.